A few years ago, a motivational speaker came to town and was giving a free lecture. Now, this was a very well-known speaker, a very popular speaker, and as a result, hundreds of people very quickly filled up the auditorium. And more people kept coming to hear the speaker. It was standing room only. They were jammed at the back. The conference organizers, they even set up more chairs in the lobby, even chairs outside in the parking lot, and set up loudspeakers so that more and more people could hear. Thousands of people ended up coming to hear the free motivational speaker. But as the afternoon drifted into the evening, the organizers realized they had a bit of a problem. They had made no provisions for food or water. People were getting hungry. It was a warm day. They were getting thirsty. And they were starting to grumble. Well, the conference organizers, they pulled the speaker aside during the break, and they said, "We got a problem. There's no provision for food or water, and people are getting restless." So the speaker said, "Let me handle this." So the speaker returned to the stage, and he said to the audience, "Does anyone have any food?" Well, without missing a beat, a small boy in the front row jumped up on the stage, and he said, "I got this." And he handed the speaker a bag of gummy bears. Now, the audience, this brought the house down. The audience, they were so charmed and so taken by this boy and his bag of gummy bears and his generosity that something amazing happened, and that is other people started pulling out what they had. People would say, "Oh, we've got a case of water in the car I can grab," and others would say, "I've got some fruit in my backpack. I've got some chips in the truck." Other people ran across the street to the Safeway and bought sandwiches and juices and snacks. And suddenly there was food everywhere. The organizers set up some tables, which were soon covered with food, and it was this spontaneous potluck dinner that had shown up. It was the miracle of abundance. Now, truthfully, that story didn't happen here in Calgary. The story did happen. It just didn't happen a few years ago. It happened about 2,000 years ago. And it didn't happen here in Calgary. It happened in Galilee. And the motivational speaker's name was Jesus. Now, I'm not going to talk about religion. I can feel some of you shifting in your seats already. But some of you might recognize the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 people. As it's recorded in the Gospel of John, on that day, Jesus was giving a free motivational talk, as he was prone to do. 5,000 people showed up to hear him talk. He was so interesting, they couldn't leave. They were getting hot, they were getting hungry. Jesus' disciples recognized they got a problem. And Jesus said, "Does anyone have any food?" And a small boy came forward and he said, "I've got this." And he gave 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. Jesus said, "We can work with this." He accepted the food, he gave thanks for it, and he told his disciples, "Pass this around to the 5,000. And then a miracle happened. 5,000 people were fed. They couldn't eat anymore. In fact, there was food left over. Now, what happened on that day? Well, often this story is interpreted as a miracle. Jesus multiplying the fish and the bread enough to feed 5,000 people. Now, that might have happened. I wasn't there. I don't know. But I think another way to interpret the story is the miracle of abundance when we live in community. When others start sharing what little bits they have with them as well. I think the 5,000 that were listening to Jesus, when they saw the small boy step forward, they too started pulling out bread and fish and olives and figs and whatever they would have eaten in Galilee 2,000 years ago. It was perhaps the original potluck lunch. It was the miracle of abundance when we live in community. Now, what does any of this mean for Calgary in 2019? And what does economics teach us about living in community? Well, economists, we spend an awful lot of time trying to solve the problem of financial poverty, the problem where people don't have enough money to support themselves or to live on. And I would concede financial poverty is a problem we need to address, but perhaps a more serious problem is the problem of people living in social poverty. People who don't have community around them. They don't have friends and family and human connections. They are living in social poverty, and they are in trouble. Economists, we also talk a lot about efficiency, the concept of you maximize the output using the fewest amount of inputs or resources. And if you are living in social poverty, it's very inefficient to get things done. Think about all of the tasks we do in our households. Ordinary household tasks. Growing up, I grew up in a family of 5. My jobs were 2. I had to shovel the walk, I had to mow the grass, and other jobs as assigned, which I'm sure I wasn't very happy about. But I had my jobs, meant I didn't have to prepare food, I didn't have to vacuum, I didn't change the oil in the car. Those were managed by other members in the household. Today, there's 4 of us in my household. Well, 2 of them are dogs, and they contribute nothing to the tasks of the house at all. Other than this, I would say their job is simple. They bring love and joy to the house, and they do that very, very well. But it leaves all of the other tasks of organizing the household down to the 2 human occupants, my partner and I. We divvy up and specialize in jobs. My partner, for example, he's very, very good at managing all the audio-video needs in the house. He sets up the cable box and the streaming video services and all of these remote controls all over the coffee table. I have no aptitude for this. I have no patience. You know, when he's away, I actually can't watch TV. I have to... That's actually not even a joke. I have to pull out a book, which isn't such a bad thing, but he does all of that. On the other hand, what he finds technologically confounding is the iron and the ironing board. He'll put on a shirt and it's all wrinkled, and I'll say, "You can't wear that shirt, you have to iron that shirt." He says, "I don't know how to iron." So I iron the shirt, he sets up the cable, it all works very efficiently. Now, this isn't anything new. Humans have existed this way forever. You think of tribes and villages in the past. Not everyone did everything. We specialized. Some would hunt, some would gather food, some would care for children, some would be the spiritual leaders and storytellers. We would specialize, and that was an efficient way to live. The problem is, today, more and more of us are living in social isolation. According to Statistics Canada, 14% of Canadians live alone, and that's up from 9% only a few decades ago. Now, I don't want to suggest if you live alone, you are living in social poverty. You might have lots of friends and family and community support around you. But many do not, and they are living in a household that's very inefficient. It's a cost on that household, and it's a cost to our economy. But the other more troubling piece of why we need to learn to live in tighter community, why the other economic cost of it, is the connection between social isolation and mental and physical wellness. Overwhelming evidence suggests the single biggest factor that will contribute to a happy and healthy life is social connections. It's not money. And if you are living without social connections, you're doomed. It is going to be very difficult for you to manage. A British study shows that living in social isolation with no human connections, it's as physically damaging on your body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The Mental Health Commission of Canada, they estimate that issues related to mental wellness is costing the Canadian economy $50 billion a year. That's almost 3% of our GDP. And an additional $6 billion a year on companies through lost productivity because of absenteeism of employees. It's an enormous cost on our economy. Now, I want to be clear. Building community and building social connections, it's the right thing to do, first and foremost, because it's the kind and loving thing to do. You can't boil this all down to economics. Humans are more than digits in the GDP. And we have to recognize that. Nonetheless, there is an economic aspect to this that we can't ignore. Living in stronger community, it's actually really good for the economy. And who doesn't want to do something good for the economy, especially these days? So this brings us all back to the story of the boy and his gummy bears, or in the original story, the loaves of bread and the 2 fish. The boy was the star of the show. Often the story is told of Jesus feeding the 5,000, but I think Jesus would agree. The boy is the star of the show because the boy set the example. The boy triggered community. He triggered the miracle of abundance. What happens when we all bring a little bit to the game? We live in a world of amazing abundance. That is the miracle when we live in community. So what does this mean for you and I? Well, I think there's two things we can all do. The first, show up in your community. Now, your community could be your physical community, your neighborhood where you live. It might be a faith community. It might be a sports team you're on. It might be a book club. Community can be many number of things. But in the communities in which we exist, show up. Bring your skills and talents and abilities to get things done more efficiently. Offer to help those around you. There's lots of things that are a struggle for some people, but a real cinch for you and for me. So show up in your community. The second, keep an eye out for those who are living in social isolation. Offer a human connection with them. Doesn't mean necessarily you have to be their best friends or even spend a lot of time with them. After all, some people might prefer to live a life of quiet isolation. They might not want you in their face all the time, but they do need to know there are humans out there who are watching out for them. Offer to take their dog for a walk when they're sick at home with the flu. Bake an extra banana bread and drop it off. Bring in their mail. Anything, just to let them know that they have people out there watching out for them. We live in such abundance. The miracle of abundance is what happens when we live in community. Show up in your community. Offer what you have. Keep an eye open for those who are vulnerable to living in social isolation. And when you do, remember, bring your gummy bears. Thank you very much.